Hey guys, this lecture will focus on how the exchange rate can affect income distribution in the economy. Now, although consumers and businesses are affected by the exchange rate, how their material or non-material living status can be either directly or indirectly affected by the exchange rate. However, only two classes of economic agents have their income affected by the exchange rate, and those two classes are exporters and importers. And we're going to focus on these two classes of economic agents primarily in this lecture. Okay, so as we know, exporters, they sell domestic goods and services to overseas or foreign buyers. And they derive an income from selling, say, wool, wheat, iron ore, minerals to overseas residents. And they get paid for that. Importers, by the same analogy, they buy imported goods and services and then sell to domestic producers of those goods and services. And so because we're trading with overseas country or foreigners or non-residents of Australia, the Australian dollar has to be exchanged for their own domestic or currency. So we can't use Australian dollars to purchase, say, clothes or cars from Germany. We can only use whatever currency Germans use, or the euro. So as we can see, the exchange rate affects income distribution, or the level of income of only exporters and importers. Okay, so we're going to see the first example. We're going to see an appreciation of the dollar. We're going to see how appreciation of the dollar can affect exporters and how they're going to affect importers. Okay, so we're just going to cut this into two separate analyses. Okay, so when the dollar appreciates, we should know by now that exports become less competitive. So our exports become less competitive. Exports become less competitive. Okay, so why that's the case is because overseas residents or non-residents of Australia need to exchange a greater amount of their currency to purchase our exports. So another working example we'll look at is, say, wheat. If the exchange rate between Australia and China is 1 AUD to 5 RMB initially, then the Australian dollar appreciates to 1 AUD to 10 RMB, for example. And this is a completely hypothetical case, and we know that I'm just using this exaggerated outcome. And although in reality, the Australian dollar won't trade at 10 RMB because the government will stop that from happening. But for this example, we're just going to use this exaggerated outcome of the exchange rate to emphasize the movement of exporters of income. Okay. So the Australian dollar appreciates from 1 AUD to 10 RMB. So say a kilo of wheat is, say, $10 a kilo initially, and we want to export to China. And so because Chinese people they don't pay using RMB, because as we know, if they pay using RMB, we have RMB and we can't use RMB here. So that means they need to exchange their yuan or RMB, their currency, to Australian dollars so that we have a use for them domestically. So what they do is they see, okay, this is $10 initially. The original exchange rate, you just multiply 10 by 5 and you get 50 RMB or yuan. And so they pay 50 RMB for a kilo of wheat in Australia. But now that the Australian dollar has appreciated from 1 to 5 to 1 to 10, they need to forego 10 RMB for every dollar. So now we can see that the cost of wheat would actually be 100 RMB per kilo, even though the actual price is still the same at $10. And so this becomes less competitive overseas, because assuming that wheat is perfectly substitutable to, say, New Zealand wheat, which initially was at, say, again, $10 a kilo, but since, say, the New Zealand dollar, so one New Zealand dollar initially traded at 6 RMB, and now the New Zealand dollar has only appreciated to 7 RMB, the cost of wheat would only have increased from 60 RMB here to 70 RMB. So obviously, Chinese residents would not purchase the Australian wheat at 100 RMB. They want to maximize or minimize their costs and maximize their living standards. So they're going to purchase at 70 RMB. So they're going to import from New Zealand. So we're going to lose our export income. So incomes would go down if appreciation of the dollar occurs. So by the same token, importers would then benefit. So how this works is, say, t-shirts. So we have a company which imports t-shirts. And we're going to say that they just want to import one t-shirt for simplicity. And one t-shirt costs $50. So $50 per shirt. It's a pretty expensive, good quality cotton shirt. And they're going to import it from China again. So let's say in Chinese yuan, this shirt was 50 yuan or RMB. So 250 RMB. If the exchange rate is 1 AUD to 5 RMB. So we can see just 250 divided by 5, and we get $50 a shirt. Now, let's say the Australian dollar has now appreciated to 1 to 10 RMB. So now the same 250 yuan shirt would then only cost 250 divided by 10, which equals 25 AUD. So Australians would only need to pay $25 to buy the same shirt if the Australian dollar appreciates from 1 to 5 to 1 to 10. So what this means is that the local importer, if they're buying shirts for $50, they're going to put a markup on, say, $10, so they want to make $10 profit per shirt. They can still keep this markup to $60 a shirt, because domestic producers aren't affected. Domestic producers aren't affected by it, or domestic consumers aren't affected by it. So they could increase the markup, or they could say, due to relative marketing practices, they could say, okay, we're going to decrease the price to 50 per shirt. There has been a decrease in price, and although there has been a decrease in price from $60 to $50, before they were only making a $10 profit, right? So 60 minus 50 is a $10 profit. Now, even though they're selling for a lesser price, a lower price at $50 as opposed to $60, they're actually making a higher profit of 50 minus 25 equals $25. So their profit has increased $15, and thus all because the Australian dollar has appreciated. So in conclusion, we can see that when the Australian dollar appreciates, I'm going to say exporters, we'll put a cross there, because exporters are worse off in their income, whereas importers, they are better off with their income. Now we can apply the same analysis to a depreciation of the Australian dollar. And we're not going to go into so much depth, but we're going to see that when the Australian dollar depreciates, so we're going to put number 2 here, depreciation, we can say when the Australian dollar depreciates, exports become more competitive. And by the same token, imports become less competitive domestically. So the exchange rate can affect the incomes of exporters and importers. So in conclusion, when the Australian dollar exchange rate appreciates, exporters are worse off and importers are better off. And when the Australian dollar depreciates, exporters are better off, importers are worse off. And so that's why the government, as part of their goal of external stability, want to keep the dollar relatively stable so exporters and importers can plan for the future without having to deal with the volatility of the dollar that will most definitely affect their incomes.